We are back for segment 2 of the Chris Richman Show for Tuesday, May 6, 2025. Welcome back in. Let's get right to it. All right, so I want to start off with this segment, at least, with a little bit on being male. Now, I know what you're saying. What? And it actually, there's a couple things that brought this up. It started off when I was looking in Bloomberg Business Week, and then it came up to National Geographic, it came up to The Atlantic, and then to National Geographic. Now, I had no idea what the hell the Met Gala was. Apparently it's some function or something like that. I don't know. Big deal. I couldn't have cared less, honestly. I'll start with the National Geographic thing a little bit here. And the National Geographic article is called Black Dandyism, This Year's Met Gala Explained. Now, I guess I would call it this. Now, for those of you who don't know, being a dandy in a traditional sense is essentially dressing very fancy if you're a guy. Let me see if I can find the actual, quote unquote dictionary definition here. Let me see here. Oops, helps so I could type. Learn your home keys, Chris. It's okay. So, dandy. Let's look at the definition here. A dandy is a man who places particular importance upon physical appearance and personal grooming, refined language, and leisurely hobbies. Let's see here. A dandy could be a self-made man in person and persona who emulated the aristocratic style of life regardless of his middle class origin, birth, and background, especially in the late 18th and early 19th centuries in Britain. Okay. So basically it was someone who, if you look at it back in the 18 and 1900s, or the 17 and 1800s, it was people who dressed better than their station normally would be stereotypically put at, So, for example, a farmer dressing in a tux, or, in, how do I put this? Dressed as a businessman, suit and tie and all that stuff. A sanitation worker who, when he wasn't at work, would dress, in very fancy clothes. A person who makes careful sense or makes sure that, their beard is perfectly coiffed and their hair is just so, and there's nothing out of place. Now, when they talk about this, and this is related to black men in this case, and how this is kind of an unusual thing, or it's, it's a new thing, I would say that's complete BS. Now, they do get into how it has happened before, and they usually, let me see if I could find the actual quote I was looking at here. And some of the stuff they call dandyism to me is just stupid. Law Roach is this guy's name. He's a style and fashion icon who I've never heard of, which isn't necessarily anything. But he's dressed in what appears to be a dress with a large pink flower on it. I don't call that dandyism. I call it something else, but whatever. But they go back and they talk in its early stages. I'm going to read a direct quote out of the article here from National Geographic. In its early stages, black dandyism served as a form of assimilation. Former slaves and black servants used their finely tailored clothes to mirror the dress of high society European whites. For black men specifically, the meaning of these garments takes on a much more loaded approach as they use dandyism to assert what had long been denied to them: individuality and freedom. Okay, fair enough. So that's what they put it as there. Basically, people who were used to being treated as slaves now being treated as, equals because of the way they dress, or feeling like they were equals. I guess I could understand that. The one thing I would say is this. This is not the 1800s. And thus, to me, this new thing is, let me put it this way. Dressing nicely now, I look at it as class making a comeback. Now, one of the people I listen to on Apple Podcasts, whatever they call it, is Sharika Soul. And I also follow her on Instagram and I believe X as well. And Sharika Soul, I first came to notice her when she was talking about being black, a black woman specifically, and being very supportive of President Trump, and this putting her at odds with a lot of other members of the black culture. And she was unapologetic about it and still, frankly, is. She does, or did, I don't know if she still does it. She should if she doesn't, because it's fantastic. She does a podcast, and it's, how do I put this? It is about black women in particular divorcing or divested. It's called Divested Diary, but divesting from black culture in that not limiting themselves to, what's become, unfortunately, the stereotypical black male, the pants halfway down around their knees and all that stuff. Is that every black man? Not even close. Not even close. Most black men are not that way. But that's become the stereotype. And unfortunately, a lot of black women have limited themselves to either consciously or unconsciously to that. That's her argument, right? And so anyway, I followed her. Well, she has taken on Instagram now, she started posting pictures of AI-generated pictures of women dressed as they would have been, say, in the 40s and 50s, and 60s even, early 60s. And it's fascinating to see this because they are very classily dressed. I think it makes the women in the picture, again, they are AI generated. These aren't real women. But I think that kind of classical, I shouldn't say classical, but what we would call retro, and I'm using air quotes, dress, it is very complimentary. Now, that's not to say that dress today isn't complimentary too, not even remotely so. There are some very, there's some very good outfits that make women look very good. And there's some that are just like, what are you thinking? Right? And I'm sure it was the same thing back then. Anyway, the point of this is getting back to a class. They show a picture of Frederick Douglass in this article. And it's that classic picture where he's got the double-breasted coat and his hair is very well coiffed. And Frederick Douglass had a fantastic head of hair, by the way. I say that as someone who clearly does not. If you're watching the video, you can see me kind of refer to my head there. But it's a very great picture. And it was, I think, let me put it this way. When I see someone that goes out of their way to be professional looking, when they don't necessarily need to be, I think that's a good thing. I'll be honest with you. For a lot of years, when I worked for Walmart, I adopted the professional, the tie and button-down shirt and all that stuff, dress code that Walmart had for a lot of years. I adopted that before my superiors did. And I kept that appearance. Even when I was, when I got out of the main store and into health and wellness, I kept that even though it was not required. I kept it because to me, it was a mark of professionalism. When I worked for another company briefly, for about a year and change, I had that. In fact, I got the nickname, the tie. Now they meant it as kind of a, hey, why are you dressing like that? And I says, well, no, I'm dressing like this because it gives an air of professionalism. Now, why did I stop doing that? The biggest reason, honestly, was I didn't feel that some of the things that were coming out of the home office at the time, Walmart's home office, were, how shall I put it, were professional. I think they were based off of political questions or political statements, rather. I felt they were inappropriate for a company to do. And so it was my way of kind of pushing back on that very subtly. Also, of course, was the fact that since you couldn't do anything, I started to put on just a little bit of weight and it wasn't as comfortable. So that's the other kind of half of that equation. Third, maybe. But, and I haven't gone back to it because, again, one, because I didn't feel the need to. I should. I really should. One of these days I will. I like dressing that way. I think it's good. And then the other part of this too is if you're not running around, if you're not doing something that requires that, it can be a little bit of a pain. Obviously, if I'm not working in retail or I'm not, doing something that requires me, at least in some form or another, to dress that way, it seems a little superfluous. Anyway, the point is I think what they call dandyism, I call professionalism. And I think it's actually kind of a good thing, personally. So we'll see what happens. I don't know if this trend will go. Let me put it this way. I would rather see, I would love to see the Black community and the Hispanic community too, which has adopted a lot of that. I would love to see this trend with, dressing as, quote, gangster, which it's not related to that necessarily now, but with the pants, halfway down their butt and, the chains 15 miles long showing everywhere, it looks gangster-ish, I guess you could say. I would love to see that relegated to the ash heap of history. I think it looks ridiculous. I think it does nothing to promote the quality that a person has. And unfortunately, a lot of people read the book. They judge the book by its cover. They shouldn't, but they do. And don't get me wrong, I have no problem with people expressing themselves, but it's funny how much we've lost that, the understanding that, hey, how you present yourself, it actually matters. It really does. If you present yourself as a piece of trash or someone who is, trying to be all thug, so to speak, I hate that term, but then you're going to be viewed as such. If you present yourself as someone who is a bit more serious, you will probably be treated as such. My opinion. All right. Now that we've done a whole lot about that, let's move on to the next piece of this little segment here, of this little talk. And that's the other two articles. There's two more pieces of this, I guess you could say. Let's go to first. Let's see, where is it? Let's go to and of course I moved everything. There it is. Building a better manosphere. This was again from Bloomberg Business Week. Now, this is written by someone named Rachel Giese, Giese. I apologize, Rachel, if I pronounced your name wrong. Not intentional, I assure you. And of course, this is a liberal writing this. Very, very obviously liberal, unlike the other part of it. The second Trump administration's agenda to date has been, in a word, masculinist. That's not the word I'd use for it, but okay. The president and his officials have threatened abortion and birth control access. Really? Ushered through appointments of some arguably unqualified men to high-profile positions, including some who've been accused of abuse. Notice it says accused. So with liberals, another thing you need to understand is it's never about the actual guilt or innocence of the person. It's about the seriousness of the charge. In this case, Pete Hegseth was an abusive person. That's never been proven. He's never been convicted of anything. Yeah, but he was charged. Okay, Bill Clinton was charged with sexual assault, rape, and about 1,000 other things. So does that apply to him as well? Oh, well, no, of course not, because he's a liberal. Anyway, and by the way, we didn't have to change the definition of a felony. And we didn't have to take a misdemeanor offense, which, by the way, was expired, and bring it back and then change it to a felony to get a conviction. Anyway, And restricted the use of words including gender, racism, so-called trans, equity, BIPOC, and even women. Restricted the use. You mean taken the actual words and put the actual meanings in there? And in terms of so-called trans, actually calling the people what they are? Is that what you're talking about? There's been the suggestion of annexing sovereign nations. Okay, no offense. If you honestly take Trump seriously about annexing Canada, especially, I don't know how to help you. You cannot. I don't know how you're alive in this world. I really don't. Or the Pope thing. Anyway, a push to ban so-called transgender people from the military, from military service. You mean like they were for many years? Got it. And a pro-natalist call from the vice president for, quote, more babies in the United States of America. Yeah, because our birth rate sucks. And we're not the only one. So, yeah, encouraging responsible parenting and families, why wouldn't we want that? Anyway, and yet Trump and the men in his inner circle, Elon Musk, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, and the rest, don't themselves recall traditional American masculine archetypes. Oh, that's good to know. Huh. I kind of see Trump, as a little more of that. Same thing with J.D. Vance. Not quite sure how you think about that, but all right. Anyway, now this is hilarious. The old school conservatism, are you ready of this? Now they don't, here's the thing. Old school conservatism, my first thought is, Ronald Reagan and Rush Limbaugh. The old school conservatism of John McCain and Ronald Reagan. Okay. Not quite sure how you consider John McCain a conservative, considering John McCain at best was center-right, and I'm saying at best. I would never call John McCain a conservative. Not as on the whole. On certain issues, maybe, but on the whole, no. Only a liberal would think John McCain was conservative. Anyway, let's keep going. Evoked taciturn sheriffs fighting outlaws, corn-fed soldiers running into enemy fire to save their platoon. Yep. Stern paterfamilias providing for their wives and children. Although these values could be patronizing and oppressive. Really. They also carried a sense of dignity, honor, and accountability, an expectation that men should stand up to bullies, speak the truth, and protect their communities, and take responsibility for their actions. Oh, so many comments. Those attitudes seem to have been replaced by a new kind of manhood, a chaotic one, born of the vast online space known as the manosphere. During his campaign, Trump candidly courted the online heroes of young men, Joe Rogan, the Nelk Boys, I don't even know who the hell that is, Logan and Jake Paul, Adin Ross. Clips circulated of Tucker Carlson referring to Trump bizarrely as Daddy. Okay. Actually watch the clip, guys, because this person clearly didn't. And to America as a, quote, bad little girl, quote, unquote, due for a, quote, vigorous spanking, unquote. Again, watch the actual clip, and you'll actually get the context of this, which this person clearly didn't do. Trump's manly bona fides were reinforced by the viral image of him raising his fist defiantly after being shot at by a sniper. Not for nothing, his 20-year-old male shooter was later described variously as confused and lonely, and was said to have been bullied in high school, characteristics common in boys who spend a lot of time in online spaces. No kidding. You think? Maybe? Little bit? Okay, so let's... I can't not go through this. Okay. So... men should stand up to their bullies, speak the truth, protect their communities, and take responsibility for their actions. Let's look at this. J.D. Vance, raised in incredible poverty, fought his way through that, got through that, despite a lot of obstacles being thrown at him. Went into the military as a Marine, by the way, and then graduated from Yale, of all places, with a JD. Okay. So, and was elected, by the way, in Ohio against, as I recall, pretty long on pretty long odds. Speaking the truth, probably is a good way to get elected. Standing up to bullies. Donald Trump, anybody? Elon Musk, who's been bullied a ton because of his success and didn't get there by being stupid, by the way. Marco Rubio, honest to God, he kind of stood up to a bully there, and that being President Trump with the little Marco thing. But, okay. Pete Hegseth. Let me put it this way. There's a reason why military people signing up for the military right now and recruitment and all that stuff is through the roof, is better than it's been in years. And it's not because Pete Hegseth is a wilting violet. Pete Hegseth is the U.S. military embodied, right? I mean, strong, forthright, yeah, has had some problems, no question about it. Has gotten through them. Now he's here. It's funny. And then you look at the people that this author undoubtedly lionizes. Bill Clinton. Stand up to bullies. No, Bill Clinton was a bully. 100%. You should put some ice on that, on her lip, talking after he had hit a woman. Getting his cronies. Well, what do you expect when you drag a dollar through a trailer park? You had the Bimbo Eruptions Unit. Speak the truth. I did not do that. I did not do that. I did not ask anybody to lie. I never had a relationship with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. If you like your plan, you can keep it. President Obama. Really? Really? Speaking the truth? Really? Barack Obama. Standing up to bullies. You mean like when he went around and started bowing to everybody and went on the American Apology Tour back in 2009. You mean that one? That's, yeah. Protecting their communities. Really? 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 Okay. Again, Clinton and Obama, seriously? Racial unrest, promoting racial unrest, both cases. Protecting their communities, huh? Allowing the Chinese to basically steal everything we had in terms of space exploration. That's why the Chinese have a space program now, is because of Bill Clinton. Giving money to terrorists, on a pallet of cash. Barack Obama, but, protecting their communities, taking responsibility for their actions. Again, I did not do that. Really? 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 Okay. Oh boy. All right. Anyway, masculinity that's rooted in macho posturing and dependent on approval from alpha males is always fragile. I'm not going to get a disagreement from me on that. It entails constant jockeying for position and esteem and submission to power. It's not a stable adult identity, but a childish and volatile one. So you're talking about most liberal men here? Trump runs the world, but struggles to manage his own emotional outbursts. Really? If you mean by the fact that sometimes he'll fire off a tweet without thinking it through, yeah, sure, he does that. I think pretty much all of us can say we do that. Don't you? Anyway, I could read this article, but it's super duper long. They basically go through here, and again, with any liberal argument, turn it around 180 degrees, and you'll actually get it right most of the time. So this article argues that traditional masculinity, which is actually masculinity, so being the provider, being strong mentally, being, having some quality of leadership, shall we say, doing the right thing, which, again, that's not necessarily a masculine value per se. It's just moral. But, basically being a good person and in the case of men, being a good male, that's somehow not, not what's being brought back now. Yeah, actually it kind of is. Men are tired, and this it segues into the next article, by the way, which is what parents of boys should know. And again, this article and the last one, in case of this one in the Atlantic, which is what parents of boys should know, the guy kind of talks about how he was told growing up, hey, stop being a wuss, or, stop crying, get up, control your feelings. You're a boy, act like it. You're tough, be tough. Which is how most of, Generation X boys and before were raised. But lately in the past, and I mean, I'll include some of Generation X, especially the later parts, which I am part of. I was raised very much in the, hey, rub some dirt in it, be tough. You're a boy, act like it. But somewhere in there, it became more of, well, we need to get in touch with our feelings, and we need to, not be so aggressive. And it became well, you shouldn't, it's very offensive to women if you offer to pay for dinner or hold a door. Okay. All these things that men were expected to do. Hold the door for your wife or girlfriend or whatever it would be. When you go to dinner, you pay. You are responsible for putting food on the table. Now, obviously there are exceptions to that, hopefully temporary. But by and large, that was the expectation, be the head of the household. If there's, something that needs fixing, fix it. That sort of thing. Is that easy to do? No, not always, not at all. But that's the expectation. Figure it out. Sometimes that's easier said than done. I can, the situation I'm in right now. I had a setback. So now I'm trying to figure out a way to get back on track. It is what it is. You deal with it. It's happened before. It'll probably happen again sometime. Everybody listening has probably had that situation. Going along great. Something sets you back. Okay, now we've got to find a way to get back to, some semblance of normal. We'll do it. You take a hit and you move on. That's just, I don't know. That to me is the way it should work and the way it's traditionally worked. But lately it's been, I'm talking probably in the last 20 to 30 years, it's been, well, it's okay. You can depend on this or depend on that or whatever. And that's not the way the world works. That's not the best way to do things. And so, and of course, this is all intentional, by the way. Now, before we even go any further, I want you to help you understand on this. This is by no means accidental. This whole thing of making men less masculine rather, making men less manly, it's 100% intentional because it throws society into chaos. Taking responsibility for your actions. They talked about that here. The whole thing of destroying the black family unit that was put in place by Woodrow Wilson and Lyndon Johnson and all these others, FDR. 100%. That was totally 100% on purpose. Absolutely. Because once you do that, once you've destroyed the family, guess what? Then they're reliant upon, you guessed it, government. And when they're relying on the government, they can be controlled. They meaning the families, women, kids, whatever, even men. They can be controlled. And that, of course, is the ultimate aim of the government, is control. So, yeah. It's sad to see these attacks on masculinity and these attacks on, and to a degree, there's an attack on femininity too. That one's fairly new and it doesn't get mentioned much. But on the other side of a coin, there absolutely is 100% attack on femininity. This whole so-called trans thing is an attack on femininity. And this actually, it's not relatively new. It's just really taken another tack recently. But the the feminist movement of the 60s was an attack on women. Absolutely it was. Well, you can only be a woman if you push off, being a mom and, you push off getting pregnant and doing all this stuff. Wait, what? If you have a husband, you're selling out women everywhere. If you are okay, coming home and making dinner and, having dinner ready for your husband when he gets off work, if you're okay being a stay-at-home mom, you're selling out every woman everywhere. What? The only acceptable thing is to be out on your own and, doing things your way. And then, of course, the other half of that was this, like I said, this attack on traditional male values. That was the other part of it. So, no, there's a huge attempt to, some people would say swap roles, swap the male into the female role and the other way. I don't think it's that. I think they're trying to make it so that there is no differentiation. And therefore, if you try to get a differentiation, you're, in terms of, okay, well, men are better at this, women are better at this, all things being equal, let's just play to our strengths. They're trying to mock, laugh at, and make fun of you for saying that. And again, that's all intentional. And it's done to hurt society as a whole and get us further away from God. That's the end result, is to get us further away from God. That's what the real person behind all this, Satan, is trying to do. And yes, that is the case. Don't even try to change my mind, because you won't be able to. You just can't. Truth is the truth. All right. Let's go off of that for a bit now. We talked about it, and that's a heavy subject, no doubt about it. Let's go to and take a musical break first, though, because we went really long on this part of the segment. So we'll do that, and we will be right back. All right, let's get right back into it. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that musical break there. So I want to talk about, as much as I hate to go back to COVID, it is necessary. Oh gosh, COVID. Oy, what a pain in the butt. All right, let's talk about this. This was in the New Yorker, and this was published back on the 30th. So it's been a while, but I didn't see it under my feed until today, which is kind of weird, or the day before yesterday, rather, actually. The miscalculation. Now, here's the thing. Before I get into the title here, you need to understand something. The media is on a mea culpa kick right now when it comes to COVID, because they were wrong. Not only slightly wrong, they were very wrong. And to compound the problem, they did everything they could to make those of us who were right, like me, like you probably, they went out of their way to make fun of us, mock us, laugh at us, impugn us, and every other thing, whilst sticking up for people who were very, 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 very wrong and didn't even ask questions about that. This doesn't seem right. No, instead they just went, yep, sounds good to me. So let's read this latest mea culpa in the New Yorker, written by Jessica Winter. On June 26th, 2020, 3 months after the coronavirus so-called pandemic, I put the so-called in there, had seized the United States, eye roll, the American Academy of Pediatrics, which represents about 67,000 pediatric physicians, issued guidance on reopening schools. The AAP strongly advocates, this is a quote, the AAP strongly advocates that all policy considerations for the coming school year should start with the goal of having students physically present in school, unquote, the statement read. The guidelines diverged from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's recommendations for in-person learning. 6 feet of social distancing, for example, should shrink down to 3. And the AAP was frank about the deficiencies and potential harms of remote learning. Quote, evidence from spring 2020 school closures points to negative impacts on learning, unquote, it stated. Quote, children and adolescents also have been placed at higher risk for morbidity and mortality from physical or sexual abuse, substance use, anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation, unquote. Okay, so that actually makes a lot of sense from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And again, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, so-called, was very much in the, how shall I put this, the medical mob, led by Anthony Fauci, I would argue. He was the head of it, theoretically at least. In reality, it was a lot of people that are a lot more wealthy and powerful than Tony, but he was the titular head of it, to use a rush term there. But again, the AAP used common sense and logic versus the CDC, which was just scare tactics and control. 6 foot to 3 feet for separation. That made sense because guess what? Kiddos have very active immune systems. Sorry, I had to wipe the camera there. And very aggressive immune systems, much more aggressive than adults do. That's common knowledge. So kiddos, if they were for some reason to get the disease, would probably be more resistant to it and develop antibodies much quicker than adults would. Makes sense. Okay, so let's keep reading here. After the statement was released, the New York Times ran an interview with Dr. Sean O'Leary, a pediatrician and one of the co-authors of the AAP guidelines. He stressed that, according to data already in hand from Asia, most children did not seem to get very sick from COVID-19, if at all, or spread the virus to other kids or adults, which again, accurate. Childcare centers that were still open during the pandemic did not significantly contribute to community spread, nor did schools in other nations that had resumed in-person classes. O'Leary allowed that there, quote, will be cases of COVID-19 in schools even where they make their best efforts. Well, that makes sense, of course, but we have to balance that with the overall health of children. Spot on, 100% spot on. The headline of the piece read, why a pediatric group is pushing to reopen schools this fall. Now again, that was the New York Times. So why a pediatric group is pushing to reopen schools this fall? So that's a very, how shall I put it, combative title. Why didn't they just put pediatric group recommends reopening schools this fall? Then it's just factual. But instead, it's they're doing this because. In the days that followed, Alex Azar, the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, and Robert Redfield, the CDC Director, who, by the way, I don't know that he got a pardon, did he, by plugs, both stated that CDC recommendations should not be used as a pretext for keeping schools closed. True. So-called Vice President Mike Pence and Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education, invoked the AAP's guidance in their endorsements of reopening schools. On Twitter, at the time, now called X, President Trump posted, schools must reopen in the fall. In another tweet on July 8th, he threatened to cut off federal funding to districts in the U.S. that did not comply, and said that in Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and many other countries, schools are open with no problems. Okay, now this is where it gets funny. Somebody apparently went to the AAP. Somebody in the medical mafia apparently got a hold of the Academy of whatever it's called, the AAP, and said, yeah, about that article you published, you're going to rethink that. And if you don't, we're going to make your life a living hell. We're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Okay? Reading from the article again, some 48 hours after the, quote, no problems, unquote, tweet, the AAP released an additional statement that differed strikingly from the original guidance. Quote, returning to school is important for the healthy development and well-being of children, but we must pursue reopening in a way that is safe for all students, teachers, and staff, unquote, it read. This time, the physicians group did not cite concerns about hearing or learning loss, abuse or mental health challenges. Quote, we should leave it to health experts to tell us when the time is best to open up school buildings, the statement read rather confusingly. Who is we? Who are the health experts, if not the AAP? This is the New York Times writing that, or New Yorker rather. But it also held that, quote, educators and parents must be at the center of decisions about how and when to reopen schools. You think? And again, it's very obvious that somebody got to these people and said, yeah, you're not going to do that. So this is a very long article, no doubt about it. So I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but they go on. The media basically goes on, the New Yorker in this case, goes on to say, well, gosh, we were just reporting what we were told, and it's not our fault that things were that things were messed up. No, it's not our fault at all. We were just reporting what we were told. Really? Okay. But it's funny, again, when you look at the evidence, the body of evidence, that is, of that, which is they did everything they could to go after people who followed the original recommendation. They went out of their way to go after and mock and impugn and make fun of anybody who said, wow, that's really weird. COVID has the exact same symptoms as the flu. And weirdly enough, there's no flu cases this year. Isn't that strange? Huh, weird. They went after anybody that said, I'm not real sure this mask thing is the best idea, because if you look at some of the reports that came out after the 1918 pandemic, masks cause a lot of deaths. So I'm not sure that's the best way to do things. If you went to people and said, why are we quarantining the healthy instead of the sick? That doesn't make any sense. No one in history has ever succeeded by quarantining the healthy instead of the sick. Why are we doing that? And again, the media is going out there and saying, well, it wasn't our fault. We didn't know. We were just reporting what was out at the time. Again, the evidence indicates otherwise. Now, if you want to tie it to today's situation, which you could, we should never forget about COVID, by the way. But if you want to tie that to today's era, if you want to call it, God forbid 5 years ago, right? But if you want to tie it to today, look at this mea culpa, this huge string of mea culpas out there about Biden, about plugs, and how he was completely, utterly mentally deficient to be president, and how the media covered that up willingly and willingly lied about it. Well, no, it wasn't our fault. We were just listening to the officials in the White House. Yeah, but did you ever ask them a question about it? A serious question, and then stay with it like a journalist would? Or did you just sit there and go, oh, well, Jen Psaki said it's no big deal. She had no idea. It was no big deal. Or, oh, it's no big deal. There's nothing wrong there. Hunter Biden said, or Jill Biden rather, who's a doctor, by the way. No, she's not. Who's a doctor, said he was just fine. And oh, he didn't take a cognitive test. That's no big deal. We don't need those. Did you do that? Were you part of the new castrati, basically? Of course, the answer is yes. Yes, of course they were. They loved them some anti-Trump news in this case, when Biden was president, so-called president. He wasn't really, but we'll go with it. The 2020 election. Really? Nobody, didn't strike anybody as odd that the campaign shut down? Same thing here. Doesn't strike anybody as odd that no respiratory disease in history has caused blood clots? Didn't strike anybody as odd that, look at this. All these people are now putting up that it's common for kids to have strokes and heart attacks when that's never been the case in history. Did you ask questions about that, news media, or did you just go, oh, that's just, it's no big deal. That's just the governments in England and the U.S., and around these other areas. They're just trying to protect the people. It's no big deal. We're not even going to ask about it. Fauci said it was okay. You see where we're going here? That's where the problem lies. And that's why we should not allow these media outlets the mea culpa, either or whether it's COVID or whether it's plugs right now. We cannot allow them to get away with this, because if they do, they'll do it again. And it goes through the other side too. Any media outlet that's not, for example, if when it talks about President Trump talks about running for a third term, if the media outlet's not going, hey, by the way, how are you planning to do that, considering it's prohibited by the Constitution? We should seriously question whether or not they are actually a media outlet or a lapdog, because it's not constitutional. I do not and would not support President Trump running for a third term, because, again, it is not constitutional. There's nothing about that makes any sense. Just saying. All right, folks, this has been the second segment of the Chris Richman Show for Tuesday, May 6, 2025. We appreciate you joining us today. We'll talk to you again soon. Have a great day, and of course, God bless you.